Today's video does contain subject matter that some people may be sensitive to, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you would like to send a story my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so, and of course, thank you. When I was young and still lived with my parents, the house that we lived in was in the center part of a cul-de-sac, and our cul-de-sac was actually connected to a road that was more commercial than residential. So, basically, our backyard ended with a large fence that was owned by the commercial property company. And then just past that was a Baskin-Robbins. Not relevant, but you can imagine how much weight I would gain in the summer having an ice cream shop in my backyard. But that also meant that there were a lot of people that would end up not too far from our house. At the time of this story, I was 15, and I was addicted to playing a certain game online. I don't remember what it was called, but it was basically a Pokemon ripoff that operated as an MMO, so you would play online against other people. The family computer was in the dining area, at a desk that was placed by the sliding glass door, so when you were at the computer you could turn to the right and look right out into the backyard. Because of this, I kind of hated being on the computer at night, because the backyard was dark and pretty creepy. So, when this happened, it was the middle of summer break, and my parents were super open about me spending my time off school however I wanted to. It may not have been healthy, but that meant that I spent several nights playing this dumb game until 3 in the morning. On this night, I was playing and trying to get my name onto the leaderboard, which I will say that I'm pretty sure I was close to being a top player. I was just playing, and at one point, I started feeling like something was off. I got that slight chill that you sometimes get when you're being watched. I turned to look out into the hallway to see if maybe my parents were watching me, or if my brother was standing in the hallway or something, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off, and I went back to the computer, and after a moment or two I glanced out into the backyard. And that's where things went from a bit spooky to downright terrifying. As soon as I looked out into the backyard, I saw a man standing just on the outside of the fence, on the stone wall that was at the back, and literally just staring at me. It would have been creepy if it was just someone standing there, but it got worse. The man was wearing a really freaky clown mask. For several seconds, I just stared at the man standing there thinking, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? Is there really a person in a clown mask in my backyard? And then it kind of clicked to me that he could probably see me in the glow of the monitor. I quickly pushed the button to turn off the screen and stood up to get away from the sliding door. I went over to the kitchen window, and sure enough, the man was still standing there, just staring in my direction. Then the man lifted his hand from his side, showing me that he had a handgun, and just kind of waved at me like, I know you're there, and just so you know, I could easily kill you right now. Yep, that was enough for me to shut the lights off and go upstairs. Should I have called the cops? Yes. Was I stupid for just walking away from the situation where an armed man with a clown mask was waving at me without telling anyone? Yes, absolutely. But again, I was 15, and I just thought, if I ignore it, it'll go away. Thankfully, it did go away. Sort of. Or at the very least, he didn't do anything to us. I, however, did learn the next day why he was standing there in a mask, and why he had a gun. Apparently, one of the stores that was behind our house was robbed. The group of guys had smashed out the glass door, and stolen a bunch of electronics and games from the video game store that was next to the Baskin-Robbins. The local news showed the story about the robbery, and they played the security footage. And the guys that they got on camera in the store were also all wearing clown masks, just like the guy that was in the backyard. My guess is that the guy that I saw was doing lookout to make sure no one was headed in their direction from the street, and I wasn't enough of a threat for him to be concerned. Obviously, this was a terrifying night for me, and I never told anyone that I saw one of the guys in the backyard, and I have no idea whatever happened to them. I would assume that they were caught, as it was a pretty messy smash and grab, though they were all masked, so who knows. I do want to say to the lookout guy that I saw, thanks for not shooting me, but also let's never meet again. I will start by saying that nothing could have prepared me for what I was going to discover the morning after a night out. It started as every other night would. Me and my family got ready to head to our local bar for a fundraising event. I had just turned 18, and I was looking to have a chill night with friends and family. I knew most of the people there, so I was feeling really relaxed. While at the bar, I went to pay for my drink when the bartender had told me that it had already been paid for. When I went to see who had paid for it, I saw my cousin's partner. He's around 12 years older than me, give or take. I gave him a quick wave and we did the normal niceties like, "Hi, how are you doing?" It's important to note that I had barely spoken more than 2 words to him before, as he was usually quiet or retreated to his room when we would go and visit my cousin. After saying thank you, I thought nothing of it. Nothing seemed off with our little interaction. By the end of the night, I had gathered my family together and told them that I wanted to head home. At this point in time, I was still living at home with my mother. She had made plans to stay at my grandmother's that night, so I was going to go home and sleep. It was around 11:30, and I was outside having a smoke, about to head to my car. Just as I was about to head to my car, I heard someone call my name, so I turned to find my cousin's partner walking towards me. He asked if I was heading home for the night, which I thought was weird. So I said it's late, so I was calling it a night. Without skipping a beat, he mentioned the car that I drive, and said that he would see me around sometime. At this point, I got a bit creeped out, so I said goodnight and walked off to my car. There were plenty of people outside, so I wasn't concerned at all. Once I got in my car, my phone went off, and it was my mother. She was begging and pleading with me to go and stay at my grandmother's house for the night, saying that she had a really bad feeling. Initially, I was really annoyed. I just wanted to go home and go to sleep in my own bed, but she insisted. I couldn't understand why. I was used to being home alone at night, but she wouldn't let it go. I hung up and started driving home. I couldn't be bothered going to my grandma's when my house was just down the road. I was tired. I just wanted to go home. Not even halfway, my phone went off, so I pulled over to check it. It was my sister asking me to please go stay at my grandma's house. I was pissed off at this point, and decided that it would be easier going to my grandma's house instead of arguing with my family. When I got to my grandma's house, everyone was already asleep. Now, I was really pissed off and went straight to sleep. The night was uneventful, but I woke in the morning to my family talking about how they all had a feeling of dread, which is why they didn't want me to go home alone that night. My mother and I left for home at lunch. I felt off as soon as I pulled into the driveway. Once I got to the door, I found a police card wedged into the door to call them ASAP. I went inside and found my mother's camera on the kitchen table. This was a huge red flag, as it was in my bedroom before we left for the fundraiser. I went to my room to find my entire room had been ransacked. No other room in our house had been touched. My blankets had been pulled back, and it looked like someone had been in my bed. My underwear drawer was wide open, and some were also sprawled out onto the floor. Another camera of my mother's was also on the table where my TV was, which was directly opposite my bed. Clothes were everywhere. By this point, I was losing my mind. If I had gone home like the plan was all along, I would have made my way through the house and then crawled into bed without switching my lamp on. I had done this so many times previously, and I wouldn't have seen the state of my room at all. My mother gave them a call to find out what had happened, and what she told me made my blood drain from my face. Police were alerted to a break-in at our next-door neighbor's house when our neighbor found a man wandering inside their house. The man claimed he was my friend and that he had gone into the wrong house, and they chased him out. Our house had a big 8 by 12 meter deck, which looked over my neighbor's house. They called police again when they spotted the same man having a smoke on our deck. The police arrived at our house at 2 a.m., but since I wasn't home, no one answered the door. They noticed the lights on, so they went inside to investigate. They made their way through the house and found a man hiding in my bedroom in the dark. He couldn't give a reason why he was there or why he was hiding in my room. They had arrested him and taken him to the station, and they wanted to know if we knew him. Turns out, it was my cousin's partner, and he'd been hiding in my bedroom for over an hour, waiting for me to get home because he knew I would be going home that night. My mother's gut feeling saved me from going home alone that night, and my neighbor's vigilance helped to catch a creep. I always listen now without question whenever she has a bad feeling. Who knows what would have happened? All I know is it wouldn't have been pretty. He was charged with breaking and entering, and he spent some time in jail before being released and moving country. Always trust your mother's gut feeling, people. It sure saved me from having to deal with that. I have a short, creepy, and weird story that happened way back when I worked at a small local gas station. I worked the second shift, and I usually got out of work around midnight or so I didn't really get to deal with the really weird people beyond the handful of drunks that we would get on a daily basis. For the most part, it was just the people who were up late and wanted candy, or the people that worked late nights and needed caffeine. It was a pretty good gig, but I had one night that was actually bizarre to me. It was a standard shift. I was just working and ringing up people, activating pumps for cash sales and sweeping the store when it was empty, when a guy in a very nice suit walks into the store. I will say that the store was in a fairly middle-class part of town, and we got people in both directions. But I don't think that I had ever seen anyone in a literal tuxedo walking into the store. I said hello as he walked in, as I always did, and walked behind the register and waited for him to come up to check out. I glanced over at the clock and it was around 11:40 at night. So that made the tuxedo even a bit more strange. But at the same time, I figured, hey, maybe he just really liked to dress nicely when he went out. He walked up to the counter with a 6-pack of cheap beer, a bag of Doritos, and several packs of Reese's peanut butter cups. I started ringing him up and made a quick quip about how he was dressed. It wasn't anything offensive or anything, it was just something like, "We don't normally get people in suits here at the store this late. A late night meeting or something?" Basically just making quick small talk with the guy as I did. He then looked at me straight-faced and said the following: "I want to be dressed nicely for the rapture." I chuckled a bit, thinking that this was a joke or something, and as soon as I met his eyes, I realized he was not kidding. I asked what he meant, basically just fishing for him to say something that would indicate that he was messing with me or something, but he glanced over at the clock next to me and then said, "At 12:01, the world is going to come to an end, and those of us that were pure of heart will ascend. People like you will be stuck here, while the planet burns in the fires of hell. I'm sorry that no one told you about this before now." He then smiled a bit and followed that up with, "But hey, at least now you know, and you can spend the next 15 minutes begging God for forgiveness." I just kind of laughed at him and finished ringing him up, and told him how much he owed. Then, I decided that I wanted to ask him something. I asked, "So, what do we do if the world doesn't end and the rapture doesn't happen at 12:01? He then grabbed his stuff, looked back at me, and said, "Well, if the world doesn't end, then God has abandoned us. There's nothing stopping me from coming back here to blow your head off, so you'd better hope it happens." And walked out of the store and back to his car. I just kind of stood there like, what the absolute hell was that? Part of me wants to think that he was messing with me, but just had a really good poker face. But the way that he said it, and how he followed it up with that threat, it was way too direct. Most people have a bit of a cracking point with their jokes, but he just kept going with it. Obviously, the world didn't end, and thankfully he never came back, but holy crap, why would you say that to someone? When I was 19, I got really into clubbing. I went almost every other day. My younger friend, who I had known in high school, was turning 18 on that Wednesday, and she asked me to take her, since I was already well versed in the club scene at this point, and knew how to stay safe and have fun. The bar that we went to just so happened to be my favorite bar's throwback night. They play 1990s to 2000s movies, and it always attracted a ton of people because the drinks were cheap and the music was good. When I met up with my friend, we drove to the bar about an hour earlier than we intended to go in, so we could sit in my car and drink. We were both underage and live in the US. We had a good time, and I had a few seltzers since I had to drive us home and be sober in 3 hours. While we're sitting in my car, which was parked across the street from the bar, and the bar was next to a police station, I tell her that I have a few rules for a safe clubbing experience. Number 1, no taking drinks from strangers, for obvious reasons. Number 2, no going to the bathroom alone, as I've noticed creepy men always target girls who are alone. Number 3, neither of us were going to go home with anybody. We go in, and we have a good time. I met up with a guy that I had recently been seeing, we danced and talked to people, and she had a few drinks. It hits 2 a.m., and they play closing time and kick everyone out. She starts talking to a guy that she met at the bar and gets his number, and we start to leave. As we're walking towards the crosswalk, a man starts walking behind us and is trying to talk to my friend. My friend is visibly drunk. I turn around and tell him to leave us alone because she just turned 18, and he looks like he's in his late 20s or early 30s, and also not drunk. He keeps talking to my friend, and she entertains him because, objectively, he's an attractive guy. He follows us all the way to my car, and then begins to ask us for a ride. I tell him no, and he continued to beg, and he even begins to tell me that he'll pay me. I tell him to just pay an Uber and to leave us alone. He still doesn't leave, and he keeps pestering me. At this point, I really just want to leave because he's creeping me out, and he's even starting to creep out my friend. I unlocked the driver door and put my stuff in while still telling him to leave. I unlock the passenger door, which unlocks all the doors, and I tell my friend to get in the car. He then proceeds to completely change his demeanor and says, "Oh, thanks," and then got in my back seat. I start screaming at him, telling him to get out of my car, and he steadfastly refuses, and even starts becoming aggressive. At this point, I want to call the cops, and I ask my friend for her phone, since mine was on the fritz and not letting me make calls. She tells me that her phone isn't working either. So, I start glancing around, seeing if I can spot a police officer anywhere, since we are across from the police station, and there's not one in sight. I start panicking, and then I see the guy that I met up with that night getting into his Uber. I run over to him quickly and tell him that there's a man in my car who won't get out, and that our phones aren't working. He tells his friend in the Uber to wait for him, and he walks back to my car with me. He starts yelling at the man to get out of my car, and the man starts yelling back while threatening to beat him up. But he eventually gets out to try and fight him. The second he gets out of my car, I tell my friend to get in. We both get in and lock the doors while the man follows him back to his Uber, threatening to punch him in the head. He gets in his Uber, and they drive away, and so do we, and the man was just left standing in the road looking very angry. The next morning, I spoke to my mom, who was a prosecutor for 20 years. She tells me that she once tried a case where two girls my age gave a guy a ride home from the bar, and he sexually assaulted and murdered both of them. Yeah, I didn't go clubbing for a while after that. Back when I worked at a local pizza place that had a really busy dining room, I would get some real characters coming in to get food. For the most part, the characters were just pervy old guys that would make a comment about my body, and I would make a point to tell them that their behavior was not appropriate. And for the most part, they would be quiet. But sometimes you would get the old guys that would make comments about learning to take a compliment or whatever BS like that. Fun fact, with those situations, ask them if they would say what they said to you to their own mother, or if they would be okay if some random guy said it to their daughters. It sometimes works against them, and they kind of get the hint. It's not relevant to my story, but it's still good information to have out there. The story that I want to mention was about a customer that used to come in frequently named Tommy. Tommy was in his late 40s, overweight, balding, and could have used a shower, but honestly, he was a pretty nice guy. I never had much of an issue serving him. He was a surprisingly good conversationalist, and he and I talked about a lot of things that most people wouldn't bring up to their waitress. Nothing weird or creepy, just some neat conspiracy things and some technology talk. The other thing I liked about Tommy was that he made it a point to never flirt with me, or ever say anything considered inappropriate to or about me. He was very respectful of me as a person, and I would say that I considered him a friend. That all kind of fell apart when the conversation happened that I would personally consider creepy. Some people may hear this and think it's not creepy, but to me, coming from him, it was actually kind of messed up. He came in one day, and everything seemed to be going as normal. We were slower than we normally would have been, so I had a few moments to pause and talk to him about random things. And I, at some point, mentioned that I was moving soon. I was actually about to move in with my boyfriend because he had proposed to me, but I guess Tommy mistook what I was saying as I was just looking for a new place to live. He immediately looked up at me and said, "Do you want to live in my basement?" I kind of paused for a moment and looked at him and then said, "Live in your basement? Are you subletting your house or something?" I wasn't interested in living there, it was just a weird thing to say. He immediately followed that up with, "Oh, no, but I could put a bed down there and then you and I could be together. You wouldn't have to work anymore. You could just stay in my basement, with me." I was honestly kind of taken aback to the point that I just sort of chuckled at this suggestion, thinking maybe he was making an off-kilter joke or something. But I realized after a moment that he was being serious. I asked him why he would just ask someone to move into his basement like that, especially if he wasn't subletting, and he told me that it would be perfect for me, because we would always be close. I never thought I would have to say it, but I told him that I was engaged and that I never saw him in that way. I think he was devastated by my comment because he just kind of looked down at the floor and stared, and didn't seem to want to talk to me after that. In fact, he actually never came in to the restaurant again after that moment, though he did send a few love letters to me for the first 3 months after this event. Now, this in and of itself is a bit creepy, but it actually does get worse. Around 2 years after all this happened, 2 years after the last time I had seen Tommy, and around 7 months after I had quit working at the pizza place, I was watching the news and saw a story about someone being arrested. And who else's picture showed up on the screen but Tommy. Come to find out, Tommy lived with his mother, and his mother was completely disabled and dependent upon him to do everything for her. From what I gathered from the story, Tommy's mother died from negligence. Basically, she starved to death because he wasn't taking care of her like he was supposed to. Apparently, when they found her, she had been deceased for a while, and Tommy was still living in the house, in the basement. The photos they showed of the house were nothing shy of a scene from Hoarders. There were small patches of rooms empty, but for the most part, the entire house was disgusting. There was trash everywhere. The walls were yellowed, and it was pretty clear that they had animals. As they were showing pictures of the house, I saw pizza boxes from where I used to work in the bathroom. That's how bad it was. He was arrested and charged for his mother's death. I believe negligent homicide is the term that they used. And that's my story of the time that I was invited to live in the basement of a guy that I thought was cool, but apparently lived with and was the negligent caretaker for his mother. Not that there's anything wrong with taking care of your loved ones, but Tommy was pretty obviously not a good caretaker. I feel terrible for his mother, and I hope that she's resting in peace, but I don't really feel bad for Tommy, and I'm thankful that I never met him again. I, 31, female, had a very uncomfortable experience at work tonight, and I wanted some thoughts to make sure that I'm not overreacting. For backstory, I've been helping at a small family-owned convenience store down the street from my house for the past few months. It's just a husband and wife and their niece, so they needed someone else for a family emergency, and they trust me. That said, it's kind of a shady gas station. Lots of strange people come through. I'm not exactly someone who blends into a crowd like this. Anyways, this guy came in earlier and I heard him say, "Wow," when he saw me, and then he started complimenting my hair, and I was like, thanks, and told him his total. Not an abnormal interaction, but it's just the way that he looked at me that threw red flags all over the situation. After I gave him his total, he claimed that he left his card in the car and was going to go look for it. So I was like, yeah, no problem. I helped the other couple people in the store. A minute after those two left, he came back in, this time holding his phone oddly to his chest, and then he started asking where he was. I was like, well, I think it would be easier to tell you where you were going if you're turned around. This is X Road. And he told me where, very next town over, so I just gave him basic directions back to the town he was going towards. It's literally a straight shot down the road that he was on. Then, he started complimenting me again about my eyes, my eyebrows. He asked my height, my age, if I was single. So I just redirected again, or lied, about my age. I said older than I am. I'm told I look a lot younger than I am. I get early 20s a lot. After ignoring his last question, I asked if he still wanted the stuff that he had came in for. He said yes. I told him his total, and he was like, "Oh, I left my wallet in the car." This was at the same time that another customer had pulled up. He'd sat his phone down on the counter and forgot it when he walked out to go get his wallet. It was open on video. I immediately started calling my husband, who is seconds away. Sure enough, I clicked the recent video and he had been recording our conversation. I deleted it. Then I clicked on recently deleted, and I deleted it there too. My husband answered the phone, and he knows when I'm at work if I call and don't speak, to just shut up and come to me right then. He walked back in, gave me a $5 bill, and I asked him if he found his card, and also mentioned that his phone had been going off on the counter and to not forget it. He was like, "Oh, my card? Oh, no, I have other cards." Okay, then why did you need to leave to go get it? But I just said okay and to have a nice day. So then he went and sat in the parking lot with the door open until my husband pulled up. He left the opposite way as my husband, and of course neither of us could see a tag number. It was such a concerning encounter. I didn't like it at all. How are you lost holding a phone with signal, obviously, as it was getting messages, and claiming to be lost when Google Maps exists? And why were you recording me? What the actual hell? I don't want to be at work anymore right now. This is not as scary as most stories, but it was really unsettling for me at the time. So, this happened in 2020. I, female 21, but at the time 19, lived in a flat above a senior residence. Since I work for that company, I could live there fairly cheap, because the company dealt with the costs. I sometimes did a night shift as well, and in the night shifts you basically look in each apartment from the seniors to check if they're all there, since almost all of them have Alzheimer's. After that, you're supposed to clean the kitchen, living room, the library, and do the dishes as well as wash the clothes. Every now and then a bell will go off because one of the residents needs help with something, so you have to go there and help them. There was already a break-in a few years prior to that, so the company installed cameras around the house. All people that live and work there know about it. On that day, I had an uneasy feeling and just couldn't bring myself to sleep in this flat, so I left to sleep at my parents' house. When I came home the next day because I forgot something, I saw that the police were there. They were questioning the night shift, and then they looked at me and asked for my ID and asked what I was doing there. I explained that I lived in the residence above, and I had forgotten something that I needed for work. They proceeded to ask me if I was home the last night, to which I said that I was not. I finally had the guts to ask what was going on, and then got told that someone had broken in that night. After that, I asked if they needed the camera footage, and their faces lit up as they said yes. I found it weird how they got so excited, but I'm not one to judge. They probably hoped that it would make it easier. I then called my boss, and she came with a laptop about 15 minutes later. We all looked through the footage together. It was creepy to see how two people carefully walked into the garden, and one of them looked through a window, and you can see him closely watching the night shift. The other took a different route and walked around the house, peeking into an apartment of a resident while they were sleeping. He then walked a bit further around the house and stood under the window of the library. We could then see how the night shift went into the basement to wash the clothes. As soon as she was down in the basement, the person who was watching her ran to the other and gave a thumbs up. They then proceeded to pry open the window. One of them jumped in and looked around confused. Now, here's why. A few years prior, when the first break-in had happened, that was the room where the medicine was kept. After that, we relocated that into a safer room. They probably just wanted the medicine since a few of the residents have strong painkillers, which are hard to get, and they probably played part in the first break-in and hoped that the medicine would still be there. They got confused when the room looked completely different. They ended up stealing nothing and just running away again. As far as I know, they were caught about 2 weeks later, but it makes me wonder, what would have happened if I had been home that night? Because this happened at a time where I would always go outside to take a little walk through the garden. I have insomnia, and this helps me a bit. Would I have met them? And if so, how would they have reacted? So, this happened a few years ago. If you follow my page, you'll know my button stories, but this is the one that changed how I move around during the night. I used to go out during the Canadian winter early evening. I enjoy the cold, believe it or not, and I found stores to be more dead closer to 7 p.m. Damn you, COVID. Though the change of hours led to things being safer as stores have people in them now into the later hours. My bag used to be a massive halo, more like a sack than a classic backpack. I could put endless amounts of buttons and pins on it, which ended up being a pain from endless buttons popping off. So, this cold night, I'm walking to the little strip mall that has a GameStop and Toys R Us, along with the grocery store. I was walking up there to get some dinner as the fam was out at events, and I didn't want to go. Walking there was alright. Walking back was a different story. There was almost no one around. I got some dinner and headed over to the grocery store when I got that feeling of being watched. I looked around, but there was no one. Odd, but I keep on trekking. In the grocery store, it's dead, but at the cash register, I got that same feeling. I looked outside as maybe there was someone there. No. Behind me? No. The cashier asks if I'm all good, and I responded with yeah, take my stuff, and leave. I head over to the toy store and hear loud crunching behind me. I turn, and a man is there. He says, "Oh, sorry, I was just reading your buttons." It's dark, like wintertime dark at 8 p.m., and you're reading buttons in a darkened parking lot? I don't think so. I was cordial but weirded out, and then I quickly left and entered the store, and I waited inside for a bit. Half an hour passes, and I get my stuff and leave. To note, I've had people read my buttons in the day or in a store, not right behind me in an icy, crappily lit parking lot. When I leave, I get that feeling again. I couldn't see him, but I knew someone was there. I rely on my size for intimidation. I was 17 at the time, but I looked 20. This a-hole had no fear. I moved quickly through the parking lot, and I heard his loud steps behind me. I made it across the street just as the walk signal changed and the traffic flowed. I caught the bus, and I never looked back to see him. I don't know what his true intentions were, and I don't even remember what his face looked like. I never had a creepy encounter again, as I was never out that late again for a bit, especially in that area. So this was a collection of Stalker and Stranger stories. If you've noticed, my Creepy Encounter Stories title has changed once again to Stalker and Stranger Stories. Don't ask, it's just a better title, because I've noticed people saying, hey, these weren't all stories about stalkers, and you are correct, they weren't. They were creepy encounters, some of them stalkers, some of them strangers. So, Stalker and Stranger Stories. It works out in the end. Not resetting the counter. The counter is staying at 14. It is where it is. Now, as always, I do hope that you enjoyed this collection of stories, but as it is every time I do one of these, I hope that this material can be somewhat educational to people. If you're ever in a weird situation, trust your gut. Don't let yourself fall prey to things that are not good. You know what I mean. Now, by no means am I saying that you can avoid every situation. I'm just saying that try your best to not get into these situations. But creeps exist, and they will always exist, and it's really difficult to get away from them, and I'm sorry to everyone who has to deal with them. But also, thank you to people who let me use their stories for these, as well as those that submit their stories, excuse me. Yeah, like I said, it's edutainment at this point. It's educational entertainment. So, if you enjoyed the video, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you would be so bold, consider leaving me a comment, letting me know your thoughts. How are you doing? How's the weather? It's actually nice and cool here today. It's only going to be 70-something. Mid-70s at that. And raining. It is raining like crazy. Has been all day. Beautiful. Beautiful. If you would like to support the channel further, you can go to the thing down below where it says join or thanks, where for a tip, that thanks is a tip. There's nothing special about that. Nothing extra, at least, that I can do. But for joining and going to Patreon, for $1 a month, you get early access to all my content like this if I get ahead, which I am ahead right now. So, all that said, friends, I hope you're having a beautiful day. I hope I see you on the next video. But until that day happens, sleep well.